mothers who really care. They care for their kids. They care about raising this new conscious generation. Tied and woven into that is this drive to make the world a better place. And I found that when you really honor your own sacred pause, when you bring the feminine in, it's a way of integrating those two.
Hello, and welcome to the Connect podcast. This show is all about helping you connect to your soul's calling so you can take action on it. Because the sweetest success is a blend of discovering your purpose with the inner drive to bring it to life. I'm Sheila Botello, health coach, lifestyle entrepreneur, and mom of two, best known for my online wellness programs, mentoring, and self-love passion. Listen in for inspiring interviews, solo chats, and Q&A sessions that will move you past overwhelm towards what lights you up. Stop accepting good enough and go for your version of great in your health, business, and relationships. Let's get started. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to share today's guest with you, not only because she loves to travel and experience the world by immersing into different cultures, but also for her heart to create radical shifts in the way we live and work in a calming, empowering way. Alexandra Raquel Hughes is a certified energy healer and feminine leadership coach. She works with smart, spiritually curious moms who are big-hearted and ambitious in their mission to make the world a better place. She teaches her clients to lean into nature's ancient cyclical wisdom and relax into their intuition so they can find ease and balance while accessing their inner wisdom, the answers that live inside, and that ultimately lead them to their authentic fulfillment and a soul and purpose-led life. She's a Peruvian-Canadian expat mom of three who's lived in 8 countries, speaks 4 languages, and has an international multidisciplinary academic background that includes a Master's Philosophy in Developmental Studies from the UK and a BA in Environmental Studies from Canada. Right now you can find her in Brazil, about to embark on yet another international move to Toronto. She's loving promoting the value of the sacred pause and the feminine, time in her garden, long sacred baths, and solo or family dance parties under the full moon. Enjoy the conversation. Hi, Alex. Thank you for joining me today. It is so good to connect.
It is really lovely to connect. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm looking so forward to this conversation, Sheila.
I am too. I've been thinking about it all week. And you and I met online in a beautiful group of women. And it's been such a gift, as we were just talking about, being able to build relationships over the miles. And while we live all the way across the world from each other, we grew up in the same city. You even went to the same high school as my mom, which is so cool. So tell us about where you're from and what brought you to the global life you're living now, because you're currently in Brazil.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. Thanks, Sheila. And it's a complex question because I think a lot of expats like me, like when people ask you, where are you from? They don't really know what the answer is, you know?
Yeah.
I was talking to my best friend from Ottawa yesterday, and she was saying how one of the beautiful things about being in Canada is that there's so much diversity, and that, you know, her mother's American, her father's Iraqi, not like the typical combination, and she's raised in Canada. So I'm like that too. You know, I'm a bunch of everything, but my dad was born of a Ukrainian father and Acadian mother. And then my mother has a German-American father, and an indigenous Andean Bolivian mother. So those are like, that's kind of my DNA blood, you know, that's what's inside of me. I was born in Peru. And when I was 3, we moved to Canada. My parents decided to move to Canada, to Ottawa. And so I was raised in Ottawa. And, I call myself a Peruvian-Canadian. But the truth is that my English is stronger than my Spanish. At one point, my French was even stronger than my Spanish. But there's something inside of me, and this really came out last year and we can talk about this later on, but when I really went inward and started to get to know myself, there is something inside of me that is very, very connected to my matrilineal line. So my mother's mother, that Andean indigenous piece, it was always celebrated by my mother. My dad and my parents split up when I was 6, and my grandmother moved in when I was about 9. So she came from Peru when my grandfather died. And so she, there's a big influence there.
Oh, yeah.
And my mother very much celebrated the indigenous knowledge piece and the connection with the Pachamama, with the Mother Earth. All of that was celebrated in our home. And even though I was this kid who wanted to fit in and wanted to be like everybody around me who was diverse, but I wanted to be like the typical kind of whatever Anglo-Saxon white Canadian, like we all do. And now, 40, however many years later, I'm like, you know what? Actually, what I want is to get to know the seeds, the maternal seed, and the wisdom that lies there. And I think that, Sheila, I think that the world needs that right now, which is so aligned with the community of women that we got to know each other in.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. Like you say, we may have, like, I don't remember really thinking I need to be a certain way. I just was what I was. However, I think I agree with some of the friends that I grew up with who were more diverse, who were trying to fit into like the white culture, the Anglo-Saxon culture. And we think, well, gee, why would people feel that way? Well, those are the messages we were being fed. And for even now, I mean, it's still a large part of what people see in the media as being, what you should strive for. So I love that there are so many more people who are going back to their roots and wanting to reconnect in that way. And that is one of the beautiful things about living, particularly in the Toronto area. It is very, there's so many different cultures represented. And I've always loved it so much. Growing up in Ottawa, of course, it was more, English and French. So the French Canadian influence, which that was interesting as well. But it was definitely predominantly white. And so coming to this region, Southwestern Ontario, it was like, wow, everything from the people to the stories to the food that, we can't discount the food here. It's the flavor, right? The flavor of the food, but really the flavor of the people and what they bring from their heritage. So I can't wait to learn what you learn about your matriarchal heritage. I love that you're wanting to connect more about that. So what brought you to Brazil and what has created your life as an expat in the first place?
Yeah, it's so I guess, when I think about my trajectory or my life journey, my expat life journey, I cannot help but be reminded that I'm really just copying my parents. I'm really just following a path that they set for me. And it's so funny because I didn't really think about it in that way, or that wasn't really a conscious part of my identity that, until recently. Again, I think a lot of self-reflection during our wonderful 2020, right? But when I think about, my parents, my father was working for the Canadian, I guess, diplomatic service, and that's what took him to Peru. My mother's father had left the United States to manage an American-owned mine in Bolivia. So he'd left his comfort zone and the land that he grew up in, and that's where he went. And my father did the same. And then my mother, when my father and mother chose to go back to Canada, she left with him. So she left her land and she went there. And so in some way it wasn't an expectation of me, but I was very curious about the world. And in fact, what I studied environmental studies at Carleton University in Ottawa. That was my undergraduate degree, after having done a backpacking trip around Latin America.
I love that so much.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so what I witnessed, in Latin America was the inequity, but also just such a ravaging of some of the land there.
Oh, yeah.
And it happens everywhere. But when you're backpacking around as a young radical, human, things sometimes you see things more clearly in other lands that you might not see at home.
And that's what I love about it. The fact that you're like, wait a second. So I'm going to go learn about this. I'm going to go home and figure this out because I want to be part of the solution. I love that.
That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was, Sheila. You're so good with words. That's exactly it. I went off, saw a problem. I thought, I'm going to go back. And after I did my environmental studies degree, I got an internship in Argentina where as a researcher, and then I applied to do a master's in the UK in international development studies. So it was all, I was going to save the world via sustainable development and social equity in the world. And so that took me to England, which is where I met my partner, who was studying international economics. And then he got a posting in Mozambique in Southern Africa. And I was so madly in love and a little bit fed up with the job that I had. So I went on with him, and that's where we adopted our daughter in Mozambique. So our first daughter is Mozambican. And I started working in international development. And so really, I think it was that passion, that curiosity, that interest, and that sort of family culture that, oh yeah, that's not an abnormal thing to do, that just kind of supported that journey, right, into a broader world. After just to, answer your question about how I ended up in Brazil, after Mozambique, which was also like Brazil, a Portuguese colony, we went back to the UK for a bit. When we were living in Southern Africa, we adopted Mia, and then Uriel, my birth boy, was born. My first birth boy was born. And then when we went back to the UK, my second birth boy was born. He was a surprise. And then my husband got offered a job with an international organization in DC. And after 4 years in DC, he was posted to Brazil, which we couldn't turn down. And so that's how we ended up in Brazil. So I've been all over the place, I think as a single woman, and then we just kept on going en famille. So here we are in Brazil, about to head to your land.
Back to Canada.
Yeah, exactly. Back to Toronto area. So.
Oh, wow. I love the story. And that must be an incredible experience for your kids. And I was going to ask you before, but you basically answered it, who your role models were for how you live your life. And I can see, it's such a beautiful lineage of exploration and obviously some sort of activism, and also really just being curious. And so now you're passing this on to your kids. How do you find they are experiencing the world as they are living in, obviously this culture that you've been in Brazil for how long now?
4 years.
4 years. Yeah. And so they've been able to see some different places and experience some different cultures themselves. And how do you feel that's impacted them?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's one of those things that a parent is constantly asking themselves, like, what am I doing to my children?
If we stay home, it happens too. So it's okay.
Doesn't matter where you are on the planet, right? You keep asking that question. So for better or for worse, we'll start with let's start with the good stuff. So they're very resilient and able to adapt, to new environments and to new cultures. And I think that they appreciate new environments and new cultures. And they've learned Portuguese, which is so super cool. It was actually one of the reasons we came here, was so that they'd learned a second language, because I had the Spanish at home, which I never went to school in. And then the French is the second language at school. Like, in Ottawa, the French is fairly strong in the school system.
Yeah.
And then, so I had a nice little bundle of languages, and my husband is from Barcelona. So he speaks Catalan, which is the language of his sort of state, Catalonia. And then he speaks Spanish. And then he learned English when he went to do his master's and PhD in England. So he had his little bundle, but we chose, for whatever reason, to just speak English to our little people. And so when we were in DC, we had monolingual little people, which is totally cool and totally fine. But we thought, wow, Brazil is going to give us the opportunity to, or them the opportunity to learn another language. And they did. because
Love
kids are
that.
so smart.
Oh, yeah.
So not only, and they're very also Brazilian in their mannerisms sometimes. So it's a really beautiful thing because they're adaptable, they're resilient, they're multilingual or bilingual, and they have this, they're able to take from the Brazilian culture what they want, and then take from our cultures what they want, and presumably leave behind what they don't want. So it just makes for a richer kind of identity. The bad bits is my daughter's favorite song. It's something like "I'm so good at saying goodbyes" or something. It's like the saddest thing ever because we've had lots of goodbyes and they've been really, really hard. And every time we go somewhere, we have to start all over again with the friends and the community and the social group. And there's an unknowing, for the kids, like now what if I don't make any friends in Toronto, Mom? What if I don't fit in? What if people think? They don't say, they have said, what if I don't make any friends? But I know that the worries are around like fitting in. And it's when you go somewhere new, when they talk about, oh yeah, well in Brazil this and in Brazil that, and we, this and that, and people be like, are they just showing off? Like, what are they like? It's not going to be it's such a big part of their experience and their lives that may be difficult to share with other children who have never had that kind of experience. So in a way, it limits your capacity to connect because you haven't shared your experience. There are things that you won't be able to relate to, or that the other kids won't be able to relate to. But with time, that dissipates. But there are definitely, and also one of the reasons that we're going back to Toronto is actually because I want the kids to have roots. I want them to know what life is like in Canada, or I should be more specific, in, urban sort of Ontario, and to just be living in a place where I get the terms of reference, which is very helpful when you have teenagers, right? Like at least quasi get them. Like, who knows what it's like now? It's not the 1980s anymore. I kind of dream of the 1980s, childhood and adolescence, but it's not that anymore. But anyway, it's closer than anywhere else. And so I want to have some terms. I want to understand, the sort of rules of the game a little bit more. And I want them to feel rooted. And so we're going to stay there till they finish high school, which is the longest time we will have ever been anywhere with the children.
Wow. Well, that's going to be a really interesting experience. And I am really glad that you're going to be living very close by, it seems, to where I live. So you'll have friends here. Don't you worry about it. And they are going to, as a result, connect and fit in through their, and again, that whole idea of fitting in, like, I don't know if anybody fits in anymore. Everybody is, more so, I think, in their age group too, learning how to celebrate everybody's uniqueness. And so it's kind of an interesting time for them where people are embracing diversity. So, it's diversity of culture in this case, right? So it's kind of an interesting time for them to be making this shift. And I do hope, I'll be thinking of them as they're making that transition, that it goes smoothly. And let's face it, high school, teenage years, it has its own bumps in the road. Even like I said, if you're with the same kids you've been with for years and years, people change and grow. So I think the resilience that they've experienced through the lifestyle they've had being raised by you and your husband is definitely an advantage for this time. So that is so amazing. And now your work now has really shifted from your work doing international work and environmental work. It's more focused now on promoting the value of the sacred pause and the feminine. And, it seems as though you've always been attracted to nature, and that obviously showed up for you on that backpacking trip so long ago. How did your career move you now into the work that you're focused on at this moment in time? And how would you describe what you're currently doing?
Sheila, I love these. It's so interesting, the questions that you're asking, because they speak to so many of the deeper reflections that I've had over the last little while. And your observations are like spot on. I was during university, not only an environmentalist, but you're going to laugh. I was also part of the ecofeminist working group at Carleton University, which combines, environmentalism with feminism, right?
Oh, so good.
And it's so good because it's essentially what I'm doing now, just circle back around, right? It's really funny. Okay, can you just repeat the question? Just repeat the question for me, please.
Yeah. So what caused you to now shift into this as your career from the work that you were previously doing?
Yeah. Okay. So there were different sort of pivot points. There were different pivot points. So the first pivot point was sanity driven, or let's say well-being driven. When my third surprise baby came along, I was working in an international development organization in Brighton in the UK where we lived. So I had Mia, who was at that time 5, almost 6, and Udial, who was 2, almost 3. And I was working for, I'm not going to mention any names, but I was working for a local international organization that supported HIV and AIDS projects in all around the world. But my portfolio was Southern Africa because, of course, I've been there and I'd had that experience. And it involved travel. It involved working in the evenings. It involved a leadership. I mean, I loved my manager and I loved the team that I work with. But beyond that, there was a leadership in the organization that was not aligned with my values. And so when baby number 3 came along, I, after 15 pregnancy tests and finally realizing that, yes, this had actually happened. Because of course, in addition to all of this kind of dynamic in the workplace and the need for travel and high stress levels, my husband was working full time. And so life had become, I can't remember what I had on my website. It had become this hamster wheel automatic pilot life, where you're just ticking the boxes and getting things done and you're not really present and enjoying the moment. Mm-hmm. And so, I started to get ill more often. And so basically I decided if I can barely manage with 2 kids, how on earth am I going to manage with 3? And so I chose to step out of international development. And I had this wonderful manager who supported during my maternity leave, and we get a really beautiful 9-month maternity leave in the UK. She had supported me to train as a coach, to build capacity within the context of, that job. But the first coaching call that I had, in my training, it was like, Mama, come home. It was a total light bulb. This is what I'm here to do moment. And so it was very soon after that call. And also realizing during my maternity leave, how much of my children I had missed, because I'd just been running around ticking boxes, that I realized something had to shift. And so I did step away and I started a coaching practice, and the women who came to me were mothers, and they were mothers who had sort of lost their way through motherhood or were feeling too overwhelmed and stressed to manage life really and to find their purpose. So that was kind of pivot moment number 1. And that led me into a business which was dedicated to supporting stressed and overwhelmed mothers. And so I had a coaching practice doing that until last year when COVID came along. And it was at that point, funny that. It was,
2020.
2020. 2020 vision. So it was at that point when I saw that it wasn't turning my crank anymore. It wasn't turning my crank. The, stress management, time management. I had then stepped into the work that you and I know so well, which is Kate Northrup's work in Origin, which is, inviting cyclical living into your world, or living in alignment more with nature's cycles and doing less and finding different techniques to manage your energy. So it wasn't only about time management, but it was more about energy management. And so I had kind of moved on and graduated from the business. And I think it had been a while that I had been doing that, but because I wasn't particularly connected with myself at a deeper kind of soul level, that the message hadn't landed. And the message landed around when the pandemic landed. And so that's pivot point number 2 in my career, where I thought, okay, if the drive, if the passion, if it's not there anymore, then what is? What am I here to do now? And so I stopped and I took my sacred pause. And that's when it became very clear to me that my job was to invite other women to take the sacred pause as well, to take their own sacred pause as well, and to, in so doing, invite more feminine energy in their world. And in so doing that, to create more balance between the doing and the being, between the, acting and the listening, between the brain and the intuition, right? So to find that balance and to invite and facilitate that balance amongst mothers who, like myself and like yourself, Sheila, and so many moms out there, really care. I mean, they care for their kids. They care about, raising this new conscious generation. And tied and woven into that is this drive to make the world a better place. Right. And so somehow they're woven together, but somehow they also tear at us, in different ways, so that we feel stretched between the two. And I found that when you really honor your own sacred pause, when you bring the feminine in, it's a way of integrating those two. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And in like integrating that, I mean, as I watch you and as I hear what you're saying and the things that you've been doing in your life, in your world, and how you're raising your kids, wanting to show them a different way, you are really driven. And yet at the same time, you also have dance parties with your family under the full moon. And I mean, that is just the epitome of like really connecting to nature. And it's like that whole circle that we are all a part of. And I'm sure that really has impacted your family relationship in a really positive way, because you're connecting together on all of those areas. And you've said that the world and our kids needs moms to feel fully alive, whole, and radiant. And it feels like it's really even more challenging right now for parents, particularly mothers. What are some of the ways that you've personally cultivated this in your life? And what are the outcomes you've found in doing so?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece, Sheila, is really understanding. Well, before we understand it, I suppose we just need to see it. So seeing and then doing the work that it takes to disentangle and understand how the culture that we live in, let's just call it the patriarchal soup that we've been swimming in from day one, how it's seeped into us, how we've internalized it unconsciously, and how we manifest that. And it can be anything from this feeling like unconsciously going down to make dinner because you've always made dinner because your mother made dinner and that was just what you did, like never questioning your role to do it all and to do it all perfectly and to take care of everyone and to be the emotional and the energetic sort of carrier in your home or holder in your home, never questioning that, because that's just what we've always been raised to do. And that's where our self-worth sort of stems from, to like another example that was, my personal experience was stating my needs. It's so ridiculous because, I say to my husband, honey, would you mind jumping? And he'll be like, how high? Like he's so good. Right. But I would literally like go into paralysis mode when I needed to ask him to do something for me, or when I would the conversation like, I need this, or these are my boundaries. These were so difficult for me because, again, we've been taught to, consciously or consciously, to be the one that gives, to not need any help, right? Mm-hmm. And to not have needs, and that, we're responsible for ourselves and everybody else, right? And that it's not okay. We're failing if we need support. And so I think that is sort of a very first step. And you're not going to see that, and you're not going to hear that. This is the beautiful thing about, not the beautiful thing, but this is actually the dangerous thing about the patriarchy and the way it lives inside of us, is that we're not going to see and hear it if we're constantly doing and going and thinking and doubting and questioning ourselves and striving for perfectionism. We are not going to ever get conscious about, what needs to shift and what needs to change. But when you start to slow down and pause and go inward, and sometimes the messages you hear won't be pleasant, but they are the initiation of an awareness and of a consciousness. So I think it's the two things. It's the be aware of assumptions that we make and of unconscious actions, right? And if you have a hard time slowing down in order to hear and to see those, then do the work that it takes to give yourself that pause, to give yourself that me time, to give yourself that quiet, to give yourself that space, so that you, first of all, can just rest and relax, and calm your parasympathetic nervous system. All about that, the importance of that in terms of health and well-being. So that's just at a very basic level. And that's just the beginning, because then once you start doing that, then the messages start coming in about what you need more of and what you need less of, and maybe some divine downloads about what your life purpose is, and maybe your soul whispers something about what you need to get rid of. So it's kind of a scary first step because it's countercultural, but I think that's what I did anyway, and that's what's made a remarkable shift. And then when you interweave, I told you I was long-winded, Sheila.
I'm loving this. Keep going.
When you interweave nature's elements into it, like when you start to play with, the element of air or water or fire or earth, each of which has this energetic capacity or invitation to do something for you. And I'll give you an example, and your listeners an example in a minute. Then it can become even more profound. So it becomes even more about like the rest and the relaxation. There's a meaning, there's an opportunity, there's an invitation to heal or to grow there. So when you weave the elements in, the experience, the potential for transformation can become quite deep and quite powerful. So for instance, I'm going to think of one of the rituals in my Sacred Pause experience, which is the 4 ritual bundle, and each of the ritual draws on one of the 4 elements. So one of my favorite ones, because I've decided that I'm a water witch, is the sacred bathing ritual. And so the sacred bathing ritual is an invitation for you to take what would be a normal bath or even a normal shower and turn it into this most incredible, sacred, self-loving experience. And so what I did was I designed a bath experience, a bathing experience, where you set up this sacred space and you imagine the water coming in from the sacred wells and the sacred streams and the sacred rivers coming in and feeding your bathtub or your shower. And, you're making it as beautiful as you can, and you can adapt these. If you're in a rush, don't worry about the candles and the incense, but if you've got time, then just set it up as most beautifully as you can. And you step into the bath and you pour water over yourself. And as you do, you imagine the water from these magic wells and these magic springs and rivers. and just cleansing you, not only like the grit of everyday sort of pollution, contamination in the air, or just sweat or dirt or whatever, but also energetically, like an energetic cleansing. And you go through every part of your body with a sense of gratitude. So you thank your shoulders for all that they've carried for the groceries and the children and, you know, the school bags and the books and all that they've carried. And, you know, you thank your breasts if they were involved in feeding children or for the pleasure that they've brought you or for just making you woman. And you thank every part of your body in that way. And so as you're washing yourself, it's not only embodiment, there's like an intentionality around it that can be very healing, because as we both know, women's relationships with their bodies are very complicated. And I've had feedback on that ritual saying this has actually shifted my relationship with my body, which of course just gets me so excited because that was the intention. And then you kind of step out of it, and I invite you to gently and beautifully celebrate yourself and dry yourself. And maybe you want to put some oil on your body and imagine that it's like this, you know, sort of layer of protection that just keeps you feeling whole and beautiful and loved. And then you sort of spin around in your glory at the end to close it. So you're bringing in the magic element of water to support you in this transformation. And so it becomes more than just, let's just have a bath and chill out and forget about the day, to a really potentially deeply transformative and beautiful, pleasurable experience, which, let's face it, like mom life doesn't invite a lot of those opportunities. But if you're going to have a bath, you may as well make it sacred and walk out another woman.
Absolutely. And it's not something that needs to be extravagant. Like, you can make it as extravagant as you want, but it doesn't need to be. And so it's so accessible, no matter what kind of bathing structure you have in your home. And when you're describing that, you know, it's so interesting, maybe because of what you told me, but the image that came to mind was of the streams flowing down the mountains in the Peruvian rainforest region. Like,
Oh,
and it's just so earthy. And it makes me realize, as you're sharing, that this is the next big project that you're releasing right now. It will have been out now when this podcast comes out. It will have already been launched. And it is what we need. It's so much connected to where you came from. So I think it's fascinating that this idea came to you as you have reconnected to your roots and to your ancestry and connected all of the dots of where your ancestors came from, and then how it's impacted your journeys in your life as well. So, and I think so many people will be able to experience this with a lot of gratitude, because it is needed. Like, we've all been forced to pause in many ways over the last year. However, have we enjoyed it? I mean, some of us have enjoyed different elements of it, maybe, but to be able to stop and enjoy just the everyday things that we need to do that are part of our day, but turning them into a sacred experience, that is a beautiful form of self-care. And as you know, my soul-driven wellness method is really centered around the framework of cyclical living. And yet it's also been centered on really tuning in with your soul, with what your body's telling you, with what your soul and your heart is telling you. And when we take the pauses, that's when those ideas come up. And that's how we can really connect to our own personal nature in such a beautiful way. And so, with this year being so challenging for so many people, I feel like a lot of people will be impacted by what you have to offer. I'm sure it's going to be a resounding success. And I'm also wondering, what were some of the themes that you noticed in the lives of the people of Brazil and the women that you work with virtually as well over the last year with all that we've been through?
I think there's heightened levels of anxiety. You know, there's so much being thrown our way in terms of stimulation. And so the importance of you know how I talked about like putting the oil on as like this protective sort of layer. well, we can use that as a metaphor of just putting sort of a bubble around us and really having very clear boundaries around how much stimulation and where that stimulation comes from. Because we know that the news is a machine to get us to watch more news again. And so even though it's really, it's important to know the facts. As a highly sensitive person, I have been very cautious about what I allow into my world. And I have seen women spin down this rabbit hole of fear that puts them into a place of, I guess, almost paralysis, but just high levels of anxiety, worry, and even depression sometimes, because they just, and the other thing is that it's not only, we have information from all over the place, and some of it is contradicting, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance happening, like it's so unreal. It feels like it's a different planet. And so I think that cognitive dissonance puts people into disarray. But then there's also, good grief, Sheila. I mean, like if women were carrying the majority of the load before this in the home, it has been an invitation for many of the women I work with to change that dynamic. And so that's a beautiful thing. But changing that dynamic isn't always easy. And it requires a lot of inner work on the part of both partners. And so that can cause a lot of tension and shifts in dynamics. So that I've witnessed a lot of that happening. And then I haven't witnessed this I have seen women stepping away or doing less. I took the sacred pause, but then I stepped right back in because I was so passionate about what I was doing. But some women have left their careers because, in fact, there's this ridiculous statistic in the States. I think in 1 year, 800,000 women left their jobs because, and I don't know if it's mothers or women, but the argument is, of course, because they couldn't carry it both. And the person who earned the most money was the one that would keep the job, and the other one would manage the family and the children. And they couldn't have like childcare anymore because that wasn't feasible. So in many ways, issues have been highlighted around inequities and then there's dysfunctionalities in the health system and stuff like that. And, really bad leadership. I would say toxic leadership in many places. So these are the things that I've witnessed. And I've also heard women say, the call for me to slow down was so loud that I couldn't not do it.
Right.
The nature has not only become my coping mechanism, but I've fallen in love with her, So, and also, I've never been closer to my family, right? They drive me mental, but I've never known them better. Right. So it has definitely been an invitation to transform. I would say, I'm sure you've witnessed that as well, Sheila.
So much, Alex. It's incredible to see how people are asking themselves different questions. They're starting to be more open to cultivating their inner strength and healing. They're starting to ask for help. And I definitely think about single moms, single parents who are needing to solo parent and, keep everything floating. It's got to be monumentally challenging, especially like you say, with the lack of childcare, just based on things not being open, et cetera. And so people needing to get creative and to help each other and to reach out and to learn how to ask for what they need for their own sanity, but also for the thriving of their children. Not to mention the example that we're sharing with our children, wanting to raise them understanding, look, for you to have healthy coping mechanisms, I need to lead the way. So there's that added pressure as a parent because, we're not going to do it perfectly. At the same time, though, they're getting to see us wade our way through it and hopefully with outcomes that they can replicate later on in their life. But we never know what's going to happen until we're in it. In my opinion, I feel like being so open with our kids, even when they're small, about the challenges that we're facing in order to shine a light on the reality of the situation, in a loving way, in a safe way, not in a scary way, but saying, look, this is how we handle challenging times and we can get through it, but we need to ask for help. We need to work together. So it's beautiful if you can model that and have the conversation going. But those statistics were astounding. So my heart is definitely with the people who've had a very, very challenging time. And that's why I like to highlight this conversation and let people know, like, this is on our minds. This is something that a lot of people are facing. And the fact that you work with many women and you see this and that you've experienced kind of both sides of the conversation, I think people can find some hope and some encouragement in, because they're not alone. And if we're talking about it, maybe we can find solutions. It has been so amazing connecting with you today, Alex. I would love for you to let everyone know where we can find and follow you online, and if there's anything that will be coming up for you in the next few months that you'd like to direct people to.
Thank you, Sheila. It's been such a pleasure. It's been a real pleasure. And I'm very excited. Fingers crossed that one day we can have a beautiful conversation in a coffee shop or a park sometime in the next few years. Wouldn't that be amazing?
It would.
So where can people find me? My website is alexandrahughes.com. So that's a place to go. But where I'm more sort of, where I share more of my life and the sort of sacred living, let's call it, is on Instagram. So Alex_in essence is my Instagram. What is it called? Home, tag, name?
Handle, tag. Oh, yeah.
Handle. Okay. Yeah. And I think that if people are curious about cyclical living, then I've got a free PDF called Your Guide to Cyclical Living. It's really pretty, and it has some how-tos, some very basic how-tos to just dip your toe in the water. But one thing, if your listeners are curious about these rituals, then they should check out my Sacred Pause Experience. And so you can go to alexandrahughes.com/Sacred Pause Experience. And I'm hoping, at one level, it really is about rest and relaxation and recalibrating your healing system. But on another level, it's about global revolution. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
So,
thank you.
I'm excited about it. Thank you, Sheila. It's really lovely. It's such an honor to be here. I'm excited.
To everyone listening, thanks for joining us today. We'd love to know what part of our conversation resonated the most for you. Do you feel like your life has transformed in some unexpected ways this year? Do you resonate with the idea of a sacred pause? Please let us know by tagging this episode on Instagram at Sheila A. Botello and at Alex_in essence. It's a beautiful way to elevate this conversation. See you next time.
Thank you so much for being here with me on the Connect podcast. If you like this episode, please share it with someone you think would enjoy it. Also, if you head over to iTunes to leave a review, I'd be so grateful. Let us know what your favorite parts were and what you'd like to hear more of. It will help us have a greater impact, elevating many more people to grow and succeed together. See you next time.